Welcome back to another episode of the Sex and Spanglish podcast. There has been an influx of listens and downloads on this podcast, even though I haven't recorded an episode in over a year. Now, I did record some episodes in May, but in my mind, those weren't like your regular podcast episodes. So when I say that I haven't recorded like a podcast episode in over a year, what I mean is that I haven't published an episode where there's like a topic and then like I'm diving deep into that topic. So for those of you that have been here this entire time and that have continued listening and re-listening to all of the old episodes despite like nothing new coming out, I want to thank you. And for those of you that are new here, welcome. So I was on a hiatus and I wanted to share why I was on a hiatus in the first place, and then get into what prevented me from coming back to the podcast, because the same thing that held me back from publishing a new podcast episode for a whole year is the same thing that's holding you back from having more sex when you want to be having more sex. So I was on a hiatus because I was burnt out. I had a part-time job, I was running my business, and I'd just been accepted into a doctoral program in addition to like normal human shit like running a household and having friends and a huge ass family and all of that. And I honestly didn't know how to manage my time, and I was really struggling with learning like how to be a doctoral student, and because the learning is very different than like regular school. And I was also struggling with learning how to rest mentally, like to rest my brain. And I was like, I do not understand how to do this. It doesn't make sense. I'm mentally exhausted, all of that. And since then, I've gotten out of burnout and I'm way better at managing my time. So technically, I could have came back and published this podcast months ago, but I was waiting for the perfect time, aka the rebrand is what I'm calling it. So some insider info here. I'm planning on revamping this podcast. So I'm going to do like a rebrand of sorts. So there's going to be like a new intro, like the words that I say, right? There's going to be a new outro, new intro music, new outro music, new graphics, all the things. I also want to change up the way that the episodes are. So I still want to do these regular episodes by myself. I really enjoy that. But I also want to add in like interviews with my clients, and I want to have like you all come on and get coached live on the podcast, so that people can get insight into like how I coach and what it's like to be coached by me and what it's like to like talk about your sex life with like a semi-stranger, right? And I also want to have some guest experts come on and share their knowledge with you, because sexuality is like a huge thing. So I have a ton of ideas, and all of those ideas are kind of fall under the umbrella of what I'm thinking of as like the podcast rebrand, right? So I thought when I come back to recording, that will mean that I will know with like 100% certainty that I can record every single week without fail and publish that episode. I don't want to like come back and record an episode and then like 2 weeks later record another episode and then like it just be really like inconsistent. I did not want that. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just not going to come back then. And then I was like, well, I'll come back when I find someone to do the cover art, right? So not only do I have to have the finances for it, I have to find somebody that's like within my budget. I have to find someone that's going to do the cover art that I want and like with the vision that I have. I'll come back and when I update all the old podcast show notes, like to be relevant to what I'm offering now. I'll come back when I can hire someone to create the intro music and when I create a new intro. So like when I write like the words that I will say. I'll come back when I figure out the interview schedule, right? Because I've never interviewed people before. And when I can find people to interview. By the way, if that sounds like interest to you, definitely DM me on Instagram at Sex and Spanglish, so that I can have you in my mind. So if you want to get coached live, we can definitely like keep it anonymous. Or if you just want to be interviewed in any capacity, you think you have something to share, like definitely let me know. Let's get this started. But anyways, I was also waiting for, not also, I was essentially waiting for all of these things to happen, right? I was waiting for the graphics to be perfect, to have that person hired, for the intro music, for the intro, for the outro, like all of these things before I took action. Specifically, before I took the action of recording a podcast episode and publishing it. And the fact of the matter is that none of this has to do with my goal. Like literally nothing. The end goal is a published podcast. But I was like, well, I can't publish the podcast without the interviews or the graphic art or the music or the intro or the outro. And as you can see, that's a fucking lie because one, I already had graphic art. Even if I didn't like it, it doesn't matter. It was there. It was enough because you actually can't publish a podcast without graphic art, from my understanding. But like, I could have literally just put a picture of myself. Who the fuck cares, right? Like the point is to get the published podcast out. I don't need interviews. I haven't done interviews since I started this podcast in 2020. And as you can see, this podcast doesn't have intro music or an intro even. And as you're going to see at the end of the podcast, it doesn't have an outro or outro music either. So none of those things are necessary in order to publish a podcast. And let me be clear, I'm still going to do all of these things, but there's no reason I have to hold off on recording a podcast before I have those things ready. Because when it comes down to it, my main goal with this podcast is to get information, to get reputable information about sex out in the world. I want to have a place where Latinas can come and talk about sex, or to listen about sex, right? And I know there are many like non-Latina identifying folks that listen to this podcast. So I just want to take a moment to thank you for being here. Even when I go on rants in Spanish, I appreciate you. But my whole goal of this podcast is to get Latinas talking about sex like they do with chisme. I want Latinas to have a space to come and have reputable information about sex from someone that looks like them, from someone that understands the messages that they specifically receive as Latinas about sex. I want to be able to connect the dots for you, to connect the Latina experience to what you're currently experiencing in your sex life. And you don't need any graphics or a polished introduction or interviews or any of that in order to get that message. Presumably, many of you have already gotten the message that I've shared in old podcast episodes because according to my downloads, y'all are still downloading them and still listening to them. And yeah, there was intro music like back in the day and there was an intro and all of that, but you could have gotten the message without all of that. And I'm willing to bet that you're here for the message. You're not here for my intro music or my introduction or my outro. Maybe the interviews, but there currently are interviews, so you're definitely not here for the interviews now, right? And I actually had an entire plan for my comeback episode. I was like, this is what it's going to look like, and this is what I'm going to talk about, and all of that. But when I realized that I was holding off on publishing my podcast simply because I wanted the graphics, because I wanted the interviews, because I wanted the special new polished intro and all of that, I realized that I was doing the same thing that many of you are doing. And I was like, this is the perfect, like couldn't be more perfect episode to come back with. Without the intro music, without the polished intro, without the professionally done graphic. The graphic that you see here, there is a new graphic if you've been here for a while. I did change the graphic, but it's literally one I created in Canva in like maybe 10 minutes, if that. It was probably more like 5. And you've already been listening to this podcast for about 10 minutes now, which means that you realize that there's no intro and there's no intro music. There are so many of you that are doing this exact same thing when it comes to sex. You are waiting for certain things to happen in order to have sex. I'm going to say that again. You're waiting for certain things to happen in order to have sex. You're telling me or telling yourself or telling your partner or other people, maybe in a Facebook group or something, that you want better sex. Yet a vast majority of you are not even having sex. So how the fuck are you going to have better sex if you're not having sex in the first place? That makes no sense. If you're not having it as often as you could be, it's because you're waiting for things to look a certain way. You're waiting to be freshly showered or have a date night or when the baby sleeps through the night or when work gets less stressful or you're waiting for a vacation or whatever other millions of excuses you've given yourself. And some tough love, friend. None of that shit fucking matters. The point is you want to have sex. That is the goal, to have sex. So you say you need to be freshly showered. Okay, fine. Then shower and have sex. Problem solved. You want a date night first? Like you want to have a date night and then have sex? Okay, then plan the fucking date night. Why aren't you having a date night? And if you are having date nights, why aren't you having sex afterwards? And if you want the baby to sleep through the night, then you can have sex at any time the baby is sleeping. It doesn't need to be at night. You can do it during nap time, right? You can be stressed and have sex. I'm not telling you to have sex at work, FYI, unless you want to. Like that's on you, right? I am not involved in this. But you don't need to have sex at work. Just don't bring your work home with you and have sex then. And you can have sex at home. People do it all the time. You don't need to go on vacation to have sex. Notice that you're using all of these as an excuse as to why you can't have sex. But what's the real reason? I just solved all of these issues for you. So those aren't the actual reason why you're not having sex. I want you to get honest with yourself. What's really stopping you from having sex? What do you think is going to happen if you have sex without a shower first? Without a date night? What do you think is going to happen if you have sex in the morning or during the baby's nap time? Or when you're not on vacation, when you have sex at home, or wherever else that's not vacation? Your answer to this question is the real reason why you aren't having sex. So I'm going to invite you today to stop lying to yourself. And I want you to send me a DM on Instagram at Sex and Spanglish. It's Spanglish, not Spanish. And let me know the real reason why you aren't having sex. Once you identify the real reason you aren't having sex, you can actually solve your problem. And you don't have to do this alone. I currently have one-on-one coaching spots available, and if you've been trying to solve this on your own for more than a month, then it's time to hire a professional. Of course, I would love to work with you, but you don't have to hire me. Just hire someone that's actually going to solve your fucking problem, because that is the goal here. And the quickie call is the first step in working with me one-on-one. So if you know that you want to work with me one-on-one, let's get to it. Let's book the call. We'll uncover the real reason you aren't enjoying sex, sin vergüenza, so you can solve these problems for good, rather than just complaining about them or venting to a Facebook group. And even if you're thinking that coaching might not be for you, or you've never done coaching before, so you're like, I don't even know what happens, that's okay. The way that you find out if it's for you is by getting on a quickie call. You're not just gonna the answer isn't just gonna randomly come to you in the middle of the night. It's not how that works. You have nothing to lose by getting on the call. It's a short 30-minute call where we're gonna discuss everything that's going on with you, and I'm going to give you a unique plan to solve your unique problems. And I'm not going to be mad if we have a quickie call and you decide that coaching isn't for you. That's totally fine. I will refer you out if I think it is necessary, or if you're like, you know what, I just really don't like you, or I don't like how you coach. That is completely fine. If you don't like me and you don't like what I offer, I'm still going to help you solve your problem by referring you out or providing you with necessary resources. The quickie call is to find out if this is for you. So book your quickie today. The link is in the show notes.